Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think it was too loud. Yeah, I need to bring it down. So, welcome everyone. My name is Jawad Khan, and I am the head of workforce development at PIF National Development. It is my pleasure to host this panel of distinguished business leaders to talk about the Global South and its readiness to embrace the new AI and emerging tech wave. Let me set the context for our conversation. In the Global South, 180 million additional people entered the workforce in the last 10 years compared to the number of jobs that were created in the same period. 179 million youth in the Global South are idle. They're not in employment, they're not in education, and they're not in training. Let's compare this to the Global North, where for every person looking for a job, there are 1.5 to 2 jobs available for them. This tight labor market situation in the Global North would require immigration levels to go up by at least 1.5 to 3 times to be able to meet the current and future workforce shortages. Faster tech adoption in the Global South is critical for the much-needed economic stimulus, productivity gains, and creation of new jobs. But at the same time, it will create disruptions in the labor markets in the short term. The challenge for the Global South is how to leverage and reap the benefits of the tech wave and at the same time mitigate risks that would lead to short-term unemployment and idle youth workforce. With that, let me introduce my panel. With me is Dr. Mahmood Khan, who is the CEO of the Evolution Foundation. The foundation is the first of its kind global not-for-profit organization that provides grants and early-stage investments to incentivize independent research and entrepreneurship in the emerging field of health span science. Thank you so much, Dr. Khan. With him is George Nazi, who is the CEO of Saudi company for artificial intelligence, Sky. Sky is wholly owned by PIF and established to support PIF's strategy and national priorities in innovating within the technology sector and positioning the kingdom as a globally competitive hub for advanced technologies. Thank you, George. With him is Vishaal Gupta. Vishaal is the president of workforce skills at Pearson. Pearson is one of the largest learning companies in the world, providing lifelong learning solutions. Thank you, Vishaal. And with him is Emal Dusst. Emal is the managing director and head of ETS Capital, the investment arm of ETS. Education Testing Service is a global education and talent solutions organization enabling lifelong learners to be future ready. Thank you, Emal. With that, let me start the questions with Dr. Mahmood Khan. How are public and private sector organizations in the Global North responding and adapting to the rapid technological advancements? Do you see any challenges there, and are there any lessons for the Global South?
So it's a mixed bag in terms of a scorecard. On the positive, I think you'll see lots of examples where we're getting rapid iteration and deployment, in particular in industries and within government where tasks are either repetitive or the intellectual part is pattern recognition. Whether you look in healthcare and diagnostics, accounting, finance, all of these, wherever there is pattern recognition, you're seeing deployment very rapidly. It creates efficiency, which is necessary in terms of just GDP output. The challenge in the Global North, which is an opportunity in the Global South, is there are long-standing either installed infrastructure or for good reasons historical regulatory frameworks which may or may not be conducive anymore. And we're having to rewrite regulations. We're having to rewrite rules of engagement. It's always tougher to rewrite. It's a bit like flying a plane and rewiring it at the same time. Whereas the opportunity in the Global South is to say, are these regulations written with the tools in mind today or the tools of the past? And as you think about this, and I know this from the healthcare sector, which I work very closely, those are being looked at. The last comment I would make, which is very relevant for our colleagues on the AI, are the tools we're developing going to be trusted? And one of the learnings is losing the trust of the end user and the population will be a huge setback. And so sometimes going fast in deployment is great, but you have to bring the end user to get along with you, because loss of trust will become the biggest barrier to deployment, and that's a huge learning opportunity. We'll talk more.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khan. George, what are some of the barriers that are preventing the global south in terms of matching the pace of technological adoption compared to the global north? And what do you think are 2 or 3 things that the global south can do to try and accelerate the pace of technological adoption?
I think the first thing is the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure. That would be the first barrier that we need to crack. And what I mean by the digital infrastructure is all the way from the proliferation of the internet to every home, to every capability. I mean, if you look at the global south, it's probably a decade behind the EU and the US when it comes to the internet. And in order to have a robust internet with the capabilities, you need to build what we call data centers, where you house these storage, compute, and cloud capability in order to enable this internet. Otherwise, you will have latency issues and what have you. But that's very important. And once you do this, then you can run these AI applications on top in the most efficient way with the latency and what have you. So that's an important pillar, and maybe I'll touch on trust a little bit. So that's an important pillar. Now, in order to do this, the second barrier that we need to conquer is the skill set. You know, that you need a technical skill set in order to develop these cloud capabilities or these internet or these AI applications, so that you can really do it in a trustful way to all the consumers and the businesses. And if you look at some of the statistics, in MENA, for instance, 40% of businesses complain that they don't have enough technical skill set in order to build this. And then the third pillar is probably incentivizing the private sector to invest. So today we have a lot of governments that are investing, but then how do you incentivize the private sector to invest? And then the fourth one is ensuring, in order to build the trust, ensuring that we have the right regulations around the data, the privacy, the sovereignty, as you provide these capabilities and these solutions. These would be probably the 3 or 4 elements from a barrier. What can we learn from the Global North? I think the Global North cracked the code on that partnership between the public and the private and the governments, and how do they work together in order to incentivize the private sector to really invest heavily as you do this. And they invested in quite a bit in training and reskilling the folks.
Thank you so much, George. And carrying on where George left about the availability of technical skills in the global south. Vishaal, what do you believe is the workforce ready in the global south in terms of its technical skills that are required for the future of work? And then, if not, then what is that dynamic skills ecosystem that can be created, which includes the governments, the private sector, the educational institutions, and other partners to make this happen?
Right, thanks, Jawad. So, if you look at what's happening in the global south, it's a bit of a dichotomy, and I think some of the numbers that Jawad shared are important. So, in most countries, there is a population surplus, in the sense that there are a lot of young people, and they are available for employment. And on the other side, you also see a lot of open jobs, new age jobs, which are not getting filled. So there is a clear skill gap, and this skill gap is only expected to widen as we go into 2030. So as we look at the global south being able to leverage AI and emerging tech, I think skills and how do you build skills is a critical element of that. There are 3 or 4 things that the global south must look at when we think about skills. One, of course, and George mentioned it a little bit, is really thinking of skills as an ecosystem. No one entity can really solve for this. So it's really the partnership between governments, institutions, private sector, the enterprise world, so on and so forth. So it needs to come together. And by the way, this is happening, particularly in Saudi. We see this happening in India, in Brazil. So there are initial signs, lot more to be done. You know, in this space, I would also say that the global south has the tendency of announcing before doing, and I think it's important to kind of stay a bit more aligned because we see a lot of announcements, but when you double click on that, you typically see the actions are not following that level of announcement. So that's on the ecosystem part. The second thing, which is also very important, and we are seeing is that skills have to be related to industries. Now, every industry has a different impact from a technology standpoint. So if you look at what's happening in automotive industry, what's happening in hospitality industry, you know, logistics industry, it all differs. So it's very important to have for young people programs which are tuned to employment in that industry. I mean, a great example of that is actually work we do right here in Saudi with PIF. We launched something called NAVA, or it's called the National Automotive Vehicle Association, which really caters to creating skills for the new automotive industry in the kingdom. And we were, I think this year, training about 200 people, you know, through that. So that's a really important aspect of that as well. And the third thing I would say really is that across the board, there is a need for additional investment. And we are seeing this, you know, there is, if you look at from the government, from the institutions, simply more money needs to flow into this space. There have been some investments, but particularly in the global south, I think they're simply not been adequate to meet the needs for these, the skill gap that we are talking about. So those are the three things that I would think would need to progress on to continue to really get that skill gap in the right place. Because if not, I think the consequences for the global south are going to be difficult in terms of significant unemployment and the impact of that on the south. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Vishaal. One of the critical players of that ecosystem is the educational institutions. And Emal, I wanted to ask you, with the new AI and the emerging tech wave, has put the education institutions, whether it is secondary, whether it's higher education, in a tailspin. They're really trying to rediscover themselves. What do you think the education institutions of the future are going to look like, and how are they going to train our young people that are in there for the future of work?
Yeah, AI is reshaping education by enabling really personalized and adaptive learning that traditional methods aren't able to achieve at scale. And to stay relevant, I think educational institutions must rethink not just what they're teaching, but how they're teaching. So what and the how. And on one hand, it is providing courses, whether it's in AI, machine learning, AI ethics, but on the other hand, also providing the tools, the AI tool for the institutions in order to provide a better outcome and really embedding it into the learning and into the teaching process. Teachers today spend 20-30% or more time on administrative tasks. So by using AI, that can unlock more time, more focus on the learner. And one institution that's a great example at the forefront of technology is Arizona State University, which early on partnered with OpenAI by not just providing courses, but really embedding it into the process and the institutions. And ultimate goal is learner outcomes, and that's going to take some time to actually see the data, maybe a year or two, because this is all relatively new. And looking to the future, I think institutions really need to embrace the idea of lifelong learning and not just providing and giving access to education in youth, but really across the career journey. This is especially relevant for the global south, because the global south, the median age is 33 versus 43 in the global north. So that's going to be very important. So.
Thank you so much. Dr. Khan, back to you. Let's get a little specific and talk about the healthcare. Now, because of the AI, what are the jobs how is the healthcare sector getting transformed? Because of this, what are the jobs that are being disrupted? What are the jobs that are going to be created? And how do we build the skill set here in the Global South which is relevant to the new healthcare?
So if we think of healthcare as the value chain, from the science and discovery, treatments, diagnostics, through development, deployment, and scale. When we think as leaders, we think of that enterprise. Every one of those steps is getting disrupted, but each one of those steps is actually creating new fronts and therefore new jobs. And let me give you examples. The way we discover drugs and diagnostics completely being revolutionized. We can now predict the structure of a protein based on a computer program, which 5 years ago would have been considered impossible. Okay? That has accelerated discovery. So for those of us like Evolution that invest capital to bring these therapeutics to market, it shortens the time frame. Similarly, as we think about development, I'll give you an example. We do randomized trials, and we go look for individuals who might fulfill a trial. With the existing data sets as they're now getting connected, in particular in the Global South, you can actually start to target, locate individuals and accelerate the development process. Ultimately, through to deployment, targeted therapeutics is here to stay, right? We grew up in an era where you gave a statin if you had a high cholesterol, regardless of anything else, that's what you got. And yet, statins have about a 20% effect on reducing cardiovascular risk. 80% of the risk still exists. So we celebrate the 20% effect. In no other business do I know that if you had a 20% effect that you'd be sitting there saying, I've got a blockbuster product. That is all being changed. But a couple of things on the educational front. The way we train physicians and clinicians, I'm going to separate the two, raises the question, in particular, let's take a look at Africa. I spoke about this earlier this week. 700 million people in Africa could have very different healthcare if we could reach them through virtual technologies. Some using AI, some just using communications. That's more than half the population that doesn't have adequate healthcare, that could have adequate healthcare. But what's the type of provider we want at the other end of that? Is that somebody with a 4-year medical degree and a 4-year undergraduate degree, which is the US model? Potentially not. They need to have access to reference points. So all of this is changing. What is not changing is the hands-on service care. That's going to actually continue to increase in demand. The Global South is going to have more people over the age of 60 than the Global North. The continent with the most actually will be Africa in the next 50 years. Who's going to take care of those people? No robots have yet been developed that can physically take care of a sick person. The Japanese and South Korean robotics industry was developed actually before the automotive industry to do that. It was not successful in human care. So we're at a juncture there where new eras are going to open up. The last comment I would make on this is that pattern recognition is done by machines better than humans. I mentioned that in my earlier comment. An EKG read by a computer is actually more accurately interpreted than typically a human being. At some point, we're going to have to let go. And we're going to have to trust the machines. But do we have the regulatory framework to license an AI to do the diagnostics for you? That needs to be rewritten. So there's a lot of these things that are going to have to be rethought.
Thank you so much. Continuing the same question, George, to you. You're leading PIF's first portfolio company in artificial intelligence. What specific skills gaps are you seeing in the Global South? Secondly, also, how do you suggest that those skills gaps can actually be filled for companies like Sky to be able to be successful in the Global South?
Awesome, thank you. But before I answer this, I'm going to tie to something Dr. Mahmoud said. Anecdotal comment, my cardiologist just stopped me taking statins after 20 years because he said there's no cause and effect. The research has shown, according to him, that there is no cause and effect between statin and heart attacks. So I'm still going, yeah, exactly. So we need the pattern recognition. We need the pattern recognition to be scientific enough to kind of collect all of these data so that we don't have to wait 20 years before we make those kind of decisions.
I'll give you a consultation afterwards.
Now, when it comes to the skills, because I want to tie it to this, the basic skill is digital literacy. So if I click down on this, we're really talking about the data and the analytics. So you really need data scientists that understand, that can feed the machine and can use the machine to do the data and analytics and be able to build those kind of models. And that means we also need to have AI experts that understand, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, how do I tokenize, how do I create these pattern recognitions to build these applications so I can really get into this. And of course, you need cloud infrastructure skill set that you need to build. All the way from how do I design the hypervisors around that chipset? So we all talk about NVIDIA or GPUs or TPUs. And I'm going to pull in my ex-Google experience about building hypervisors, container management, orchestration, multi-cloud, being agnostic from what's below. All of these skill sets we really need to be able to develop. Your second question is, what is it we're going to do? We really need to create serious training hubs. For instance, we're embarking on working with Sadaya and others in order to create these AI hubs, and with PIF in order to create these AI hubs so that we can train our people to not only coming from college, but also from experience with other partners from the global north that will help us develop our people so that we can build these applications. And maybe from the global south, we'll be the first to crack whether we need statins or not.
Thank you, George. Vishal, so we've talked about, obviously, access, and George talked about partnering with the global north, the leading institutions, to bring academic institutions essentially to build world-class skills. Access is one aspect of this, but the affordability is another aspect, and a very critical aspect for this also in the global south. Now, what do you think are the mechanisms of how we can make world-class education, if it's accessible in the global south, more affordable for the youth?
That's a great question. So one thing which I think all of us need to keep in mind is that there are hundreds of millions of youth, young people in the global south who don't have access and affordability for the kind of education we are talking about. And that's a topic which is always important to keep in mind, because we really can't afford to leave anybody behind on this journey of where technology is going. So there are 2 or 3 things which become very important to really fix that affordability gap. One is investments by the government, right? And this is different from different countries in the global south. It's not homogeneous in that sense, but government investments are very important at different levels. Government investments to the students, give them subsidies. There are a lot of loans available in Saudi, for example, for students to study technology, some of the stuff that George was talking about. That's very important. Subsidies for educational institutions to have those programs, to design those programs and bring them to life, with these students, set up new universities. There are quite a few new centers being set up, not only for AI, but across the emerging tech sector. And last but not the least, how do you also enable enterprises, big companies, to also offer some of these courses, because this is a significant investment for them as well. So I think government and the public sector has a big role to play in this, in making this change happen. There is also the role of the non-government organizations or non-profits out there. I think in most global south, there are pretty active non-government organizations. We are working with organizations in India, in Brazil, who are really bringing education to the remotest parts, to tribal areas, to rural areas, bringing them the benefit of how do they bring those courses to those students. And technology, again, becomes really important. You can innovate with frugal technology, not by spending a lot of money, by keeping it low cost. One can innovate. One example of that, for example, in the global south, English language is a big challenge in many countries, and English language is important to progress in technology, especially if you want to connect to the global north. And again, you can learn English language through a lot of technology today, and get those students into it, and then get on to the journey of technology. The last thing I would say, just to finish my comments, I think there is a need to localize a lot of these programs, and localization is very important. So if you look at the global south, there are certain industries which have been stagnating, and they will continue to stagnate because of lack of skills. but these industries are probably not as relevant in the global north, but they're very relevant in the global south. So it's really important that when you're doing these programs, designing these programs, you are customizing it for the local nuance of that country. It could be cultural, it could be economic, it could be political. Every country in the south is different. I think keeping that in mind is also another important factor to make it affordable and to make it accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishaal. We talked about the Emal, we talked about the ecosystem, and there's obviously businesses play an absolutely critical role in this because they're the ones who are going to give the jobs and are creating these jobs. How are the businesses, especially in the global north, are reskilling and upskilling their existing workforces? And what are the learnings that we can bring to the global south from that?
Yeah, so businesses are equipping really the younger generations as well, and they're not just doing that later in the workforce, but even early on. And some of these examples, and the businesses are actually partnering with educational institutions by embedding. Germany, perfect example, where Siemens and SAP is actually working with institutions to embed coding and curriculum early, in the different parts of the educational journey. So not just in the workforce, but earlier on. And in terms of the global south, I think some of those lessons can be taken, and providing the different institutions with these models, but all of these models need adjustments. You can't just take what works today. You need to have the local context and the local challenges, whether it's access, whether it's digital infrastructure. You need to be able to adjust for that. One example of that is in India, where businesses are actually working to provide mobile-friendly training modules. And that's one particular adjustment. And in order for this to work really in different societies, you need to have make AI inclusive. You cannot just make it just for some of the parts of the population that have access to it. So with the mobile friendly, you're able to actually get it out to the rural areas and the underserved populations in order to make this work. So,
thank you. We talked about the role of the government. I just want to touch upon that with all of you. If the government had the financial resources, I'm sure they would be investing in all the areas we talked about. However, the governments in the global south do not have the financial resources to make that. And the double challenge is the size of the youth is so big and the resources available are so small that it's difficult to do this. So in this context, what do you think the new role of government should be in trying to reskill, upskill, and new skill the swaths of youth that they have, and most of them are idle? I'll start with you, Dr. Khan.
Let me give you two quick examples, because if we come at upskilling based on what's worked in the north, I'm not sure we'll fill the gap. I'm going to give you two real-world examples. Everybody knows that sometimes people need a spine implant for spinal surgery. It's made of titanium. It costs thousands of dollars. It's expensive even to carry the inventory. That's a traditional model. Now, today, you can get a CT scan done in your local. You can send that image digitally to another computer that can model it, send the application to 3D print it, and you can do distributed manufacturing in a small town at a low capex and have it customized for that patient to do it. We won't talk about the robotic surgery and all of that. Now, that's a very different supply chain. It's a very different manufacturing skill, and you do not have to set up a really expensive capex to build a factory. So are you going to upskill to run a factory? Or are you going to rethink the supply chain and say, what is it that I really need? I'm going to use an education institute example. These are just examples. Most research laboratories in the global north run from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. local time. Faculty go home and the lab is shut down. All the equipment sits. In a world where huge capex has been invested, if you can connect that through robotics and provide access to it remotely, somebody sitting in a village in India can come up with an idea to do a research study, pay for the OpEx part of it, which is a lot cheaper in the global south and test it in an installed infrastructure where the capex has already been made. Now, this is not Star Trek. These things are actually happening today. So what is it, the skills that you're trying to develop? If you're going to emulate what has already worked with huge capex already installed, then you're going to use, the answer is different. The whole barrier for governments is often shut down because you think capex. What we have to be thinking about is what do these government-public partnerships look like where capex becomes distributed in its application and you're really thinking about opex. And I think a big mistake we often make is this global north, global south, high capex, can't afford it, I don't know how to move forward. Really have to think about, if I could take capex out of the equation, what is the answer, what's the business model, how do I move forward, and then come back and solve for the capex, which might be leverage existing assets, shared economies, it's not just taxis. I've given you high-end, expensive shared economy examples that are the way of the future if we're really going to solve this, because we can't produce another 10 million workers overnight. What are the alternatives? So I'll defer to my expert colleagues.
George, the role of the cash-strapped governments in trying and playing a productive, constructive role in trying to reskill, upskill the youth in the global south.
Look, I would say it's all about, very similar. How do you do the reskilling and the upskilling, right? I like what the doctor said with respect to leveraging another workforce to be used based on that capex and the opex. Because what I was going to say is, there's probably three pools where you have the R&D pool, which looks like an investment. There's the self-cannibalization pool, where you're reducing the cost, and there's the value-add pool, where you're increasing the revenue. So if you look at AI and automation, in the sense that I'm self-cannibalizing in order to reskill and upskill, so there's a demand for the people I'm going to reskill, you might think that, well, what am I going to do with the labor that's available? Well, if you look, let's say, here in the kingdom, with all the construction that's taking place and the vision that we have for 2030, we shouldn't worry because we'll be able to find those resources, to fill these resources with other projects. I'll give you another example. For instance, even in the global north in Europe, they expect that they will displace through AI and automation 57 million by 2030. Yet, they're going to create 61 million through AI and automation, right? So that means also you need to look at the value add that you create. So by looking at these three pools, you will have that combination. How do I do the reskilling, upskilling with the right certifications?
Fantastic segue into my next question, which is, yes, there are going to be 57 new jobs, people disrupted, but 61 new jobs created. The question is, are these the same people that are going to occupy these jobs? So again, as disruption happens, the role of the government, they're obviously cash-strapped. How do they find creative, innovative mechanisms to try and reskill and upskill the youth and the regular workforce in their country?
So, I will just add to what a couple of my colleagues said here. So firstly, when we look at the government spend, Jawad, you have to start by really, while there is, obviously, governments are cash-strapped, but whatever investments are being made today, are they effective? Are they really creating the results that they need to create, right? Saudi, for example, right, we see a lot of skilling initiatives across different ministries, not necessarily coordinated, not necessarily aligned to each other. So that's, I think, really a starting point for the governments, that whatever you're spending, are you spending in the right way? Are you getting the outcomes that you're getting, right? Second thing is really about, how do you get the best from the global north and partner the global north? I think, and there again, there are two things. Firstly, in the upskilling area, you could easily bring in some of the best thinking from the global north into the global south. So we in Pearson, we run a lot of vocational programs across the south, be it in Brazil, India, right here in Saudi, in Jordan. And a lot of those programs were conceived in the US or in UK a few years ago. We kind of then tailored it for those countries and we brought them home. So really reducing the capex, as I think Dr. Mahmood was saying, and really creating an OPEX model for these countries to invest in. So that partnership with what you can learn from the global north and bring it here, customize it, and then deploy it is very important. And the last thing I will add to this, I think there is a big role for the big tech to play here. I mean, if you look at, and today, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they're all announcing their results today and tomorrow. And it's incredible to see the growth they are seeing. All of them see the South as a major opportunity, and they would be happy to invest. Microsoft, in fact, made an announcement just a few months back, investing $2.4 billion in the kingdom right here. So I think the government has a major role to play to enable those investments. And again, getting that capex in. Tesla, I mean, Tesla is coming to India. It's a huge thing. They're willing to invest and create the jobs of the future as a part of that investment. So big tech has a big role to play in fixing that gap as well.
And just to add a few, I agree with all that. I'll just go into a couple examples. One example is in Singapore. They've got Skills Future initiative where government as well as even corporations are paying into sort of these learning credits that are able to then be used for those workers that are being displaced in order to upskill and reskill. Another example, in Rwanda, they created this innovation city where they were giving government tax breaks for technology companies and others to come to that. That really created an ecosystem of different companies there and talent it's actually an example of the global South for the global South. Not, the first example was from the global North like Singapore, but there are a lot of these different initiatives happening, especially in places like Rwanda and then India as well. So those are just a couple examples.
My last question to my panelists, and I need a 45-second response. The advantages of tech adoption for the global South are clear. But at the same time, governments and of course other social organizations are very worried about the short-term disruption and making a lot of people unemployed in that process. One idea of how they can make sure that tech adoption is done, at the same time, there are not these swaths of unemployed people that leads to then social economic disruptions.
So I didn't understand the question there. I understand.
What do they do? What do they do? What does the global South do to keep adapting and adopting technology, at the same time keep people in jobs and not create these social economic problems in their countries?
So there are lots of examples. I'll give you one that is an immediate need. There are 1 billion people hungry on the planet today that go to bed every night hungry. Most of those are in the global South. 40% of the fruits and vegetables produced in the global South rots before it gets from the farm to the consumer, after production. You want to reduce hunger immediately, you figure out the local solutions to get produce from farms to the market. It's simple, it solves hunger, increases GDP, improves health, and the global North is not incentivized to solve that problem. Only the global South can do it, and it will have an impact next harvest.
George?
I agree. I will continue upskilling and reskilling, especially on the technology side, and on the downside, it will be covered.
Vishaal?
Yeah, I would say, firstly, I'm a big believer in, and I'm very optimistic about what's happening in the global South as well. There's a ton of innovation. I think we need to really leverage on the hunger and the appetite of the youth in the global South, who are really out there to make a difference. And if we get that right, and we support them, give them the right access, I am really optimistic that we will not get to that point of social and economic disruption that you were talking about.
Emal?
Yeah, look, beyond the upskilling, reskilling, I think it's really just also making sure those in the underserved communities have access, or really the awareness of digital literacy. So having the digital literacy is important. AI, it won't work without making it inclusive. And it's important that the Global South is part of the initial development of AI, versus the Global North developing it and then bringing it to the Global South. So it's important that this all happens together for it to be effective.
Fantastic. And lastly, based on our conversation about the global South and the pace of tech adoption and and creating the right skill sets for them to be able to do that, Dr. Khan, one parting comment for our audience that they should take away from our discussion.
I think I'm more optimistic than pessimistic. I think there are going to be success stories. How fast we learn from them and scale them and deploy them is going to be probably the rate limiting factor. There's no shortage of ideas. There's lots of pessimistic views. But at the end of the day, take the wins, no pride in ownership, and scale them.
Thank you. George.
Continue investing in AI and developing the AI capabilities, and sky is the limit.
Vishaal.
I would say very optimistic about the Global South, and it all comes down to execution.
Well,
I think Global South, I think, has a demographic advantage with the youth and the age. So I think it's actually an opportunity and needs to be leveraged, taken forward. So.
fantastic. I want to thank my panel, Dr. Khan, George, Vishaal, Emal. Thank you so much for being part of it. And thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.